One of the first things I like to say is that I'm not a Bigfoot guy. At least I wasn't when this all started. I'm just a language guy, language teacher, who had spent a career in the Navy transcribing the human voice on tape, which I think set me up for what was about to happen in February of 2008. I think it was President's Day or something, where my son, Stephen, had the day off. But I taught at a military college, so we didn't have the day off. So I often had my kids come and hang out with me in the classroom. And this one particular morning, Stephen, we were just sitting, it was between classes, and we were sitting there on my laptop at the time, Googling stuff, and he had a project for school that I didn't know about at the time. But he told me, he says, Dad, he says, I want to write a paper about, of course he's 12 years old at the time, 3 things: either the Loch Ness Monster, aliens, or Bigfoot. And he says, so I said, well, let's see what we can find on Google. So I'm Googling Bigfoot stuff, and he says, Dad, what do you think Bigfoots sound like? And the only thing I remembered some B-grade movie from the 70s, and I let out a howl. Whoa. He said, come on, Dad. That's not what Bigfoots sound like. So I said, well, let's Google it. So I literally Googled Bigfoot sounds. Immediately took me to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, and to one of their little prompts there that said Bigfoot sounds. And I went down and it said samurai chatter. I said, well, this sounds interesting. I'm a language guy, right? So I said, chatter, that implies language. So I said, but I'm still in my paradigm, my old paradigm. Thinks, no, what is this goofy stuff? So I played it. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I became silent. So that my son was actually worried about me. And I went back, I played it again. And I went back and I played it again. And it was only a morpheme stream of maybe 5 seconds. But in that 5 seconds, my whole paradigm changed. Stephen, he remembers it a little differently than I do. But because my whole paradigm changed at that moment, I think my version is probably closer to the real version. He says, Dad, what's wrong? He says, what's the matter? What are you doing? And I played it again. I said, listen to this, Stephen. I said, there's language in here. He says, come on, Dad. Come on. It sounds like, he said, it sounds like apes fighting to me. He says, how can you hear language in there? Because it did. To the average ear, it would sound like, right? Which you will hear here in a moment, right? And I said, Stephen, we have to slow this down, like Dad used to do in the Navy. And he said, okay, so that's what really set me off on a kind of a quest to get a hold of the original tapes. Because in that moment, I came to realize 3 things. One, that it was not human. I'd spent my whole life at that time listening to the human voice on tape, and I could tell immediately that it was not a human. The second thing was, it was speaking a language, and I could hear it, even though my son could not, probably because I had been conditioned my whole life to hear things that other people can't hear on tape. And the third thing that I immediately realized is that it was not fake. I had, in my career, I had been trained in all of the best deceptive practices in communications. And I knew that just from my professional experience, that this was not fake. I didn't know at the time that a study had already been done by Dr. Curlin of the University of Wyoming, a specialist in sound. Now again, I'm not a specialist in sound. I'm just a language guy. But I could tell this was not, it could not have been faked. So anyway, in 1978, Dr. Curlin had already gone through these tapes and had proven that there was no deception. It was not fake. So I walked away that day with those three conclusions: that it wasn't human, yet it was speaking a language every bit as complex as our own, human languages, and that it could not be fake. After a little bit of detective work, I was able to find Ron Morehead, and later, Ron Morehead introduced me to Alan Barry, who had recorded the first set of tapes, and which prompted a trip to California, which I was very anxious to do, to get a hold of these tapes. I wanted the originals, just the way we work with it in the Navy, right? Anyway, 3 days later, before I was even starting to prepare my trip to California, the original tapes arrived in the mail. And now I don't mean reel-to-reel tapes. Of course, they were, the CDs. And I delayed my trip going to California for 4 months while I transcribed those tapes, according to what we would call military standards of transcription. So then I made the trip out to California, and I drove up to Ron's house, and Al Barry was there. Al Barry was already in poor health, but we walked in, and I walked in and sat down to have a beverage, and we started talking, and he said, I said, one thing I don't understand, Ron, is how could it be 35 years and no one else detected this on these tapes? He says, Ron, I said, did you ever think that you had language on these tapes? He said, and Al spoke up, he said, Scott, we knew it from the beginning. We've tried to tell people for 35 years there's something else going on here other than big gorillas running around, in a forest. And Ron says, he says, Scott, we've been looking for a guy like you for 35 years. Which, of course, made me feel pretty good. But, and that's what started it all. And it continues. What I want to do, and what usually it really makes the biggest impact, is to just let you hear it yourselves. So what I intend to do is I'll run it at full speed, what we call real time in transcription, for a little ways, and then we'll pick some spots. After a couple minutes of hearing this, you will be able to hear the language. You will be able to tell me, yes, there's language there, even without slowing it down, because what it amounts to is adjusting your hearing to something you've never heard before. And then after we do that, I'll come back and we'll pick specific spots. And I'll show you what we do in transcription to recover the articulated phonemes. And then you'll really hear it. Okay? So, and then right at the end, you'll hear what we believe is the big male get really angry and aggressive. And those we don't think are have much language in them. It just sounds like he's wants to scare the heck out of these hunters that are up there. So I'll play you that. And I will tell the truth, if I had heard that big male go off like that, up there at the mountain, up there at the Sierra camp, which Ron and I have made now, as of last summer, 9 expeditions. Which, by the way, it seems that those are probably over with for specific reasons that I'll tell you about, unfortunately. But to set this up, just so that you kind of know what's going on, these hunters had asked Al Barry, who at the time, he was a scientist, so he's scientific-minded, but he was also working for a local TV station as a reporter. And these group of hunters had been going up there since the late 50s. They had a specific camp, which they had, it was in the wilderness, a wilderness area, but they had built a lean-to cabin, sort of illegally, up there so that they would have a place to stage their hunt every year. And it was early on that they started experiencing these strange events and vocalizations that at different times scared the heck out of them. So it was because of this, after so many years, and them going back down and telling their friends and family, and the word gets out, oh, these guys are crazy. They think they got some kind of, Bigfoot or something up there on the mountain, right? They finally got tired and said, no, let's invite somebody to go up with us and take their, recording equipment. So that's what Alan Berry did. And at the time, of course, the only way you get up there is with a mule train. In fact, that's one of the points I like to make. To get up there is 10 miles of switchbacks, straight up the mountain, like this. And then from there, 8 miles on the top of the ridge to get over to the Sierra camp. So it's impossible to do, it's impossible to carry all that stuff up yourself, so we have to employ mule trains. And to get us up there with enough food and stuff and camping gear and other gear to survive for a week or two. And this first time, Al Berry had taken one of a big old, because this was 1972. So he had to carry a big old reel-to-reel tape recorder. Okay. So to set this up, they're in there. It's nighttime. The sun had gone down, and they wanted to attract the creature in. The creature that they called Biggie. And you'll hear the human voice on here calling them in. Hey, Biggie, come get some dinner. What they had done is left a big pot of stew on their fire, the little stove that they had up there. And then they had gone into their little lean-to cabin and just waited. And then this is what started. What really changes things up here is that when they first started hearing these vocalizations out there, they didn't know that they were getting them. They were so excited and that they wanted to make sure that they were getting this. So they come out of the lean-to, and one of the guys that picks up the mic, and he wants to get it closer to where these sounds are coming from. Now, if you can imagine, pitch black up there on that top of that ridge, it is pitch black. And even the tree cover doesn't allow the stars to shine through. So if you can imagine this hunter, of course, all of hunters, we all like to think we're big macho guys, right? They weren't going to let on at all that they were at all scared. But if you can imagine this hunter trying to walk up toward these sounds are coming from with the mic, talking now, hey, is this the direction that it was coming from? Yeah, right up there. Keep going. So, and you'll hear that here. What happens is, apparently, we have a big male, we have a female, and you will hear the difference here. It doesn't take a linguistics expert to tell, hey, is that a male hominid speaking, or is that a female hominid speaking? You'll hear it. And then we have a juvenile, or a child, which, by the way, this is the first thing you'll hear. It's the first sound that they heard that night. So what happens to fill you in on the backstory of this, they go out there and they try to place the microphone up a little bit closer. And the whole time this is happening, the male is, I can say this, is talking to the female back and forth. And it almost seems like they're having a little bit of an argument, right? Which any of us that's been married realize that's a normal human pastime, right? So what happens is they set the microphone up there, and these two are like almost arguing over who's going to go down and get the dinner. We can't do it while those hunters are out of their cabin. And they don't go back immediately into their little cabin, which I believe is what finally sets off the big male. And so that'll give you a little bit of background, and we can look at it again as we go on. But I'm just going to let this play, and you'll see right up here. Can you see that? Yeah, right up here. That's real time, 100% at the speed that it was taped. And then later on, we'll come down here and we can do 70%, 50%. And what I have found in studying these tapes is that the prosody, or the deliverance of language, is approximately twice as fast as that of humans. Now that doesn't mean they're more intelligent, that they're have a better use of language. It might just mean that they're very excited. We humans do that too when we're mad or excited. We start talking about twice our speed, right? But I'll let you guys be the judge of this. Okay? So, let's see. Just going to let it roll. That's the juvenile. And some of this space, I'll fast forward through some of it, but here we go. Oh, guah. One thing to listen for is they have it. They'll have. I'm just going to mimic a couple things that I'd like you to pay attention to as we go through. They have a terminal expression. It's almost like many human languages have this. Chinese, for example, has when two people are engaged in discourse or conversational turns, meaning it's my turn to say something, then it's your turn. They seem to have a terminal expression that's just simply or. So they'll say, Ramho, Baraho. And it seems to be like CB radio guys, hey, over, it's your turn to talk now. Right? So listen to that, and then you will also hear some things like snarls, moans, things like this, but especially the snarls. They'll often end that conversation turn with a and then a snarl. It sounds something like this. This is not something, and by the way, these frequencies, again, have been studied. These are way beyond the ability of humans to produce these sounds. So, yeah, we'll just... Is that loud enough? You hear that? Now that's the female. Gigo, whoop me one for platform. There was the, did you hear that? The snarl. And again, we're going to come back and listen to this at a little bit slower pace so you can... Befawadi, Befalulu. Now, let me. I want to stop this here, just so that you can hear it at real time, and then we'll come back and hear it maybe at half time, half speed. But it actually sounds like the big male has made a joke, and then laughs at his own joke. This is beyond anything we could imagine, but. Just going to play this part here, and you tell me what you think. If he's kind of chuckling to himself, maybe laughing at those hairless apes that are running around that little cabin thinking they can fool us into coming out. Right? Here. Favabli osikloto. Now here, let's see if this is it. No. Oh. This is where he's starting to build himself up. Now you'll start to hear the humans as they're trying to walk. See, they don't know they're getting this stuff yet. When it's pitch black out there on that mountain, it sounds like this. Now that we're pretty sure is the female talking, and then the male interject. The juvenile. I'll play that again. Oops. That's obviously a juvenile. Again. Now here soon you're going. Oops. Let's see. Here soon you're going to see the humans speak up. But here they are, right here. You see it there. You can see the difference. You can see the difference in the vocal footprint between the humans and the creatures. So what they've done, is they picked one guy. He says, "You go stand by the stove, by the food, and you get their attention. You make them come down to you, hey, come get some dinner, you know? And while we sneak up and try to trick them and put the microphone closer." Well, now, years after the fact, we know you can't trick them. But, so I can, I can imagine a guy who gets chosen for, dinner duty. Come down and get some dinner, boys. Here's more humans.
Okay, Biggie, here comes some dinner.
Then you'll hear them walking up and trying to...
Where'd it sound like it was coming from? Which direction?
Which direction? Where do we put this?
Come on, Wyatt.
Right up in the direction you're going, and a little bit to the left.
Get through some dead space here. There you go.
Yeah.
So while this is all going on, while the humans are out there, at first, the Sas are silent, observing, which they seem to be very good at doing. That might be the best thing they do, is observe the behavior of humans. Again, human activity. Oh, and there's who. Now the problem is, they come back and they don't immediately go back into their cabin. It seems here that the big male begins to build himself up. And here we go. There you go. And he gets into like almost an ululation where he's going blah, blah, blah. Just like, this, getting mad, just like a human would do if he was trying to scare a bunch of kids. Blah, blah. Which you will hear. Here we go. Now, now here the female interjects. Not there. Right there. You can tell the difference, right? Male. So that little interchange with him is almost like the female comes out and says, we can only imagine, hey, what are you trying to scare them for? They're trying to feed us. And he's like, the male, of course, this is all supposition. And it's fun, to presume what they might be talking about. So you got the big male coming out, maybe saying, hey, I'm the big male, and I'm in charge of this family, and I'm going to make the decision here. Whatever. But it almost sounds a little bit too familiar to us, even though we don't know what they're saying. You can hear that as a terminal expression. And then he starts to calm down. He still doesn't like it. He's calming down a little bit. Well, let's see, maybe we can. Was there? Okay. Now, if you'll notice here, you see this timestamp down here at the bottom? What you've just listened to was 7 minutes and 48 seconds. We have over 90 minutes of this stuff. With the Barry tapes, with both Barry tapes and the Morehead tapes combined. That's why it took me 4 months to transcribe it before I even made my trip out to California. Now, the way we transcribe something is through techniques of, and you'll see me do it here, where we take a very small segment of articulation and we put it on a loop. And we loop it, and then we begin to speed it up sometimes, but most of the times, in this case, slow it down so that we can recover onto paper the morpheme streams, the phonemes that are being articulated. Now, we were trained to do this, in the crypto community of the military, we're trained to do this. And we're actually even trained to be able to recognize other languages that are not our target language. And there are times that we are required to transcribe out in the field, transcribe languages that we've never studied, so that we can send it back to NSA, in those days, NSA, right, to have it analyzed. But you have to send it to the right people. So you have to know, is this a Slavic language? Is it a Asian language? Is it, Germanic, etc.? So these are things that we're trained in. So let's go back to the beginning. We won't listen to the whole thing, but we'll pick out some specific articulations to look at. And now I think even at real time you can hear this very first thing. Vamho baruchahu. And so this is what we would do. We would isolate this. Actually, let me go back a little further. Just that one little articulation, and that's not even a full second. Maybe a little over a second. But it might take me 15, 20 minutes to get it down to my satisfaction. Right? And then you got to take a break. You get too much input in here. We've learned over the years, you have to stop after 20 minutes, a half an hour. You have to stop, take the headphones off, and just be silent for a few minutes. Otherwise, if you just kept it up, you're gonna veer off course. That's why it took me 4 months to transcribe the whole thing. So here, I'm just going to play this again at real time and let you hear it. See what you think. Vamho baruchahu. Of course, I can't do it as quickly as they do. Baruchahu. Here's another very good point as to how we know that this is not a human, is because they are articulating on the pant, which means they are actually articulating phonemes on the inhale. Baru, who? Now humans are capable of doing this, but we're not capable of doing it like this, because in almost every one of these articulations, you've got some articulation on the pant. And they seem to do it with such ease. That's one of the reasons that we know it's not human, besides the frequency differences. Again, Vamho barucha hu. Well, obviously I'm not a Sasquatch. Now, let's slow down 50%. Now, some people have asked me, and I've been challenged by professional linguists, I should say linguistics specialists, which, by the way, are not necessarily language specialists. Linguistics is a science, and it studies, well, how does a human make an L sound? What do we call that? How do we make a K sound? Blah, blah, blah. This is the science of linguistics. Okay? Language is different. Language is an art that we are all very adept at because we've been doing it all our lives. We've got a lot of good practice. Right? So I've been challenged by people saying, well, how do you know this is not gibberish? How do you know this isn't just a gorilla up there pretending to speak a language? Well, in the study of psycholinguistics, we know that gibberish itself implies language, because you must first have the ability to communicate a language before you can create sounds that are nonsensical. Otherwise, how would we know they were nonsensical? So that's my main point, is gibberish itself implies language. And we don't know. He could be just making some sounds that he thinks will scare the humans or communicate with. We don't know. Right? But we know that if they're giving us gibberish, they have language. Let's just go to some more of this and put it back at real time. We'll find some good ones, and when we slow them down, you'll be able to. This is an interesting one here. Okay, and again, at real time, you should now, after having adjusted your ear to it a little bit, you should now be able to hear the linguistic articulations in this at real time. And then when you slow it down, it becomes obvious. Real time. And does that sound a little bit more feminine? As opposed to the big, angry guy? Now at half speed. And we can change it up here. We can move it up a little bit quicker, a little bit higher. See? Okay. I've actually had someone in one of my former presentations say, I heard that, and maybe I should touch on that too, the concept of cognatic words and phrases. Because I've had a lot of people come up and say, hey, when you played that sound, I swear to God, I heard him say, be careful now, proskur, or and never go home. Of course, the problem with that is we can't make those assumptions. And to test that, I have had native linguists from all over the world, many who have been colleagues of mine, sit down with these tapes. I've had Asian guys. In fact, one of my very best friends, Jerry Masura, native Japanese speaker, one of the first guys I played this to. And it was the same afternoon that I heard this with my son Stephen. I took it upstairs to Jerry's room. I said, listen to this. And it was the part of the samurai chatter. And he says, oh my God, what is that? I said, I don't know, but it's not a human. He says, no way, it's not a human. I said, what does it sound like to you? And I didn't put any seeds in his mind. I just want to hear what he said. He said, God, it really sounds like an ancient form of Japanese. I said, well, can you tell what they're saying? He says, no, there's not a word in there I understand, but it's the deliverance that sounded Japanese. I don't know if we can all remember the old samurai TV series, from the, I don't know when that was, 70s, right? And they had the Japanese samurai come out and they speak in a very low staccato. You might remember that, all right? Well, these first clips I played for Jerry sounded very much like that, just in the deliverance, right? So my point about cognatics is, I've had Cherokee. I've had Shoshone, actually, when I was out west. I've had Germanic people. I've had a Celtic guy. Spoke Gaelic, listened to it. I've had Russians. I've had Farsi, Persians, and of course Asians, and English. And everyone we ever play these tapes for, if you play it long enough and you listen to it long enough, you're going to pick out little snippets that you go, oh my God, he's speaking English. Well, we simply cannot make that assumption, because I could speak enough Russian for you now. You'd go, okay, oh well, part of that's English. No, it's not. They just have to be cognatic words or phrases. Right? So that's one of the big questions I'm always asked is, man, I hear some Native American in there. Have you ever had a Cherokee listen to it? Well, yes, I have. And every one of them has found words in there that are meaningful to them. So there's actually a phenomenon, I think it's called pareidolia, where the human mind actually has an inherent need to find order or some kind of substance to what they're hearing. When you hear something like this that is so out of your paradigm, then we humans try to make sense of it. It's part of our nature. Let's play a little bit more. More for Kenya. Half speed. And so on. Hopefully, by now you are able to hear some of the language characteristics in all of it. You don't have to be, a language guy. You don't have to be a PhD in linguistics to begin to hear it, because it's so much a natural part of ourselves that when you hear it and it's presented in the right way, you begin to hear it at real time, the same way I did. Right? This is an interesting spot here. After I just got done telling you that we can't presume any cognates in here, we get this articulation where the sas is, and it's the female here, is saying the word. I'm sorry, we can't use the term word. We have to use morpheme, because words in any language are notoriously hard to define. Why? Because every time a word is used, it really depends on the person that's using the word as to what the meaning is and all of that. And they change with every utterance. The concept of word changes. So that's why I don't use the word word. We have to use linguistics expressions like morpheme and phoneme. Phoneme is an individual sound, like ka, ba, la. A morpheme is when you combine more than one phoneme to create what we would normally call a syllable, or a part of a word, or maybe even a whole word. Simply, we don't know. And then we're using the term morpheme stream, where we have a combination of morphemes, where there is certainly the beginning of one morpheme and the ending of that morpheme, and then others begin, and what we would normally maybe call a sentence or an expressed thought. Right? My point being here, this is so interesting because this sas, the female, actually utters the morpheme food twice in one morpheme stream. And I'll play it back here for you. But this, what's interesting about this is, we hear this, and oh my God, she's saying, and you'll hear this too, it actually says, it almost sounds like that she's saying, me watch food, plain food, or plen food. Which if we were going to really, go out on a limb, could sound like, I'm watching the food and there's plenty of it. Me watch food, plain food. Now, what's interesting about this is because the humans never use the word food, as you heard before. What they're saying when they're calling the Sass to come down and take the food, they're using the word dinner. As you heard, they say, hey, Biggie, come down and get some dinner. Right? But let me play it. It's just, and again, we can never come out and definitively state, oh my gosh, we know what they're saying. Therefore, the strangeness. Again, 100%, and then I'll slow it down. Of course, way too fast for anybody to understand that. When we slow it down. Oh, good. Giggle, whoop, me watch food, plain food. Now, something else I could say about cognatic expressions. A lot of people say that they hear them speaking Spanish. Some say, well, this sounded like English, only it sounded like Elven English, well, whatever that's supposed to mean. But if we take a look at it, these creatures, as we've come to believe, one of their most important skills seems to be observation of human beings. We think that's why they're so hard to find. I mean, if your entire survival depending on knowing where the humans were and what they're doing, then you would, over how many thousands of years of evolution, would you not be developing that skill of observation and maybe even mimicry? Or certainly we would begin learning some of the words that the humans use. Okay? On this continent, Spanish has been, right away took over, the dominance of language 500 years ago. So if that's the case, Sasquatch could have been listening to the Spanish language. It doesn't take that long to learn a language, right? English has been a dominant language in North America for 400 years. So again, it just adds interesting complexities to what we're looking at. And what is it that we're looking at here? I would tell you, Ron's routine and continuing request of me. He says, Scott, I just want to know what they're saying. You got to tell me what they're saying. We want to know what they were saying to us out there that night, because we know they were trying to communicate with us. And I've had to tell Ron, there's no way that we can know. The only way that you can verify actual syntactical meaning is to sit down with the speaker, especially when we're doing what we have to call radical translation. In order to begin from nowhere, we would have to sit down, have tea with a Sasquatch, and say, okay, when you said, Baruhaho, Did you mean a tree, or did you mean a pot of stew? What did you mean? We have to confirm that with a speaker in order to. When we have a language that is not related to any known human language. Now, the first person who actually brought this up back in the early 60s was the eminent, late philosopher and linguist, Dr. Willard Quine, who we've had to consult his many works in order to try to understand where is our starting point, where do we go? And he stated in one of his works that what if, postulated this, what if human beings were to discover a language that is not related to any other language, any other human language? And he gave us sort of a guideline. He says, and he actually gave us the word for it. He's the one that first came up. We would have to call this radical translation, because we cannot depend on other linguistic lineages to try to understand what's going on. And he said the first, step one, he said the first thing we would have to do is find out what the word that they used for yes and no. And strangely, okay, we linguists, we crypto-linguists, we use a lot of tools. One of them is frequency counts. So we would go through this whole thing and create a frequency count of every single phoneme, and how many times is that phoneme used. I don't know if any of you have ever done crypto quotes, the little books you can buy, and they're like a crossword puzzle, only crypto quotes, right? You use frequency counts. For instance, the most common letter in any human language is E or E. Certainly in English, right? If you watch what is it? What is spin the wheel? Yeah. So they go R-S-T-L-E. So forth, right? So this is one of the things we've had to use for here, right? And we do the same thing with morphemes. So what we have discovered, what we have found in our frequency counts is these creatures actually say the morpheme no more than they say any other morpheme, what we would call a word. More than any other word they use, they actually use the word no. No, nah, nah, and all of its different ways, right? So we think we might have a start here only because, and this might be an unfortunate thing to say about human beings, we know that in all human languages, the most frequently used word in any language is the word no. It's been speculated to me, too bad that it isn't yes. So that's, we've sort of begun, we feel, to understand a little bit about this, what's going on. But the concept of being able to translate it is way far off. So, again, I'm often asked, well, what are they saying? And I have to say, it's not possible to know yet. It's possible to guess, as long as we call it a guess. It's possible to suppose, or as long as we call it that, right? But we simply do not know. And still Ron asked me, Scott, we up on that mountain. Scott, you got to come up with something, man. You got to tell me what they're saying. And I have for 10, 11 years now, I've had to give him the same answer. It's too radical. We're not there yet. Now, if the government has one, and a lot of people believe the government has a couple of these guys, in cages somewhere, I'd love it if they came and got me and says, hey, why don't you try to talk with us? I would love that. But how likely is that to happen? Probably not. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'd like to open it up for any questions we might have. And I've told Adnan that it's probably best for me not to get into the weird crossovers that we are beginning to see. And I would just give you a little bit of background on that, because me and Ron, about 5 years ago, there were too many weird things happening to us, and to others, and really for the first 5 years that we went out and did these conferences and I presented our study, we actually had a pact. We swore to each other, hey, we're not going to go into the paranormal here. We have too much to talk about with just the fact that these things exist. And they're sentient beings. I will come back to that. But anyway, Ron and I made this pact. We can't talk about the paranormal stuff, man. There's too much weirdness here already. So that's how we went through our first 5 years of this. And for the last 5 years, we finally agreed with each other, said, Ron, we can't ignore this stuff anymore. There's too much going on that's not explainable by a gigantic, hairy, wild man that's never been scientifically documented running through our forests. Somehow it's more than that. And I didn't want to take up too much of my time. Now, maybe during the panel discussion later on this afternoon, I can start to talk a little bit about some of the crossovers. That's good. I always like to see, I'm a teacher, right? I always like to see the faces of my audience to make sure I'm keeping them awake, right? So.
My question is, just from some of the sounds I thought were similar to something I've ever heard. Have you compared any of that to like a Mongolian or Eskimo throat singing?
Eskimo throat singing I have not. Actually, we have 7 Mongolian students at Missouri Military Academy, where I now teach, and I have them. In fact, I demonstrate this in my philosophy class because it's paradigm changing, right? And so I've had Mongolian students listen to it, and yeah, they do. They'll say, "Oh my gosh, that sounds Mongolian." And like I say, whoever I play it for says the same thing. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not offended by any challenging question. In fact, I encourage them, because that only skepticism and challenge only furthers the study, clues us in as to where we need to go.
I'd like to ask you to speculate a little bit. Some of the similarities, all the people hearing their own language when they listen to this, and the finding no in it often. Would you speculate that maybe there was once a common language for all humans?
Between us and the SAS? Or you mean
for all
worldwide?
Humanoids on the planet?
I would have to say no. It seems, well, I'm not an anthropologist or a scientist in that way, but we do know. Now we know that all human species, at least, came out of Africa, and traveled to the different places all over the world. You know, before the time that we actually had racial differences. You know, so yeah, we would probably assume that those first tribes that came out of Africa had a common language, but then, you know, isolation causes wide diversity very quickly in language and culture and everything else. So we have to assume that the ones that went into Asia, you know, very early on, not only their physical characteristics began to change, but surely their language would have changed very quickly. That's a good question. Oh, and by the way, hey, I can add this to that. For instance, there are words in, and most of them having to do with members of the family that are so close. For instance, brot, term brother, what we say brother. Baradar in Persian, baradar. It's just to me, it's almost just a different accent from, you know, how long have the Persians, you know, been isolated from the Europeans, the Scandinavian people who use the same word, brother, brat. So yeah, we have to think they had a commonality somewhere.
Yeah. Be interesting to hear that original language.
Oh boy.
One more comment on that would be the Tower of Babel.
Oh.
You know, that separated our languages
Well,
possibly.
yeah.
If you're a Bible scholar and believe the Word of God, then we know for sure there was a common language at one time. God, I'm excited to hear you because my question is, I heard questions. I
Absolutely.
actually heard inflection, intonation.
Yes. Query inflection is part of it, and what's interesting is the response sounds exactly like our response to a question.
Yeah.
And
So
this is another kind of funny, interesting thing about when the male and the female are going back together. They're stepping on each other in their utterances, as if the man or the female is answering the question that is being asked before it is completed.
It's like she jumps in.
Yeah,
with
it's
her
like
response. Now, that's what I heard too.
And by the way, and there's another reason that we know that these could not be faked too. And Dr. Curlin is the first one to point that out, is that when the humans are talking, they're being stepped on by the creatures. It's another reason. We have lists of reasons why we've made these conclusions, right? Now, I didn't that first morning. I didn't have all that, right? I simply knew. But it's all been corroborated since. And one of those is the fact that the two creatures are stepping on each other, and they're also stepping on the utterances of the humans, back and forth.
Yeah.
And that can't be faked. Even nowadays, it can't be faked in that way.
I even heard you mention other tapes, other recordings, and my question is, did you ever hear anything? This is so clear conversational. What I heard, and was more of a sad sound, and it was long, and I wouldn't call it a howl, and I wouldn't call it but more moaning sounding.
We do our best to stay away from howls and moans because they're not linguistic in nature. They might have some kind of meaning, of course, right? But we don't. That's beyond what. There's plenty of guys out there studying the moans and the howls and we've got our hands full with plenty as it is. So.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Your focus.
Now
is strictly this.
One of the functions of language is the expression of emotion. And as you heard here, what I think the guy is might be making fun of those little skinny, hairless hunters, right? And then kind of chuckling to himself. That's emotion.
Even
But
some
there,
sarcasm. You know?
I'm sorry?
Even some sarcasm.
It could be.
Almost.
Yeah, we have to know what they were saying. But there was one spot on the second Barry tape, where there were some jet airplanes, which they do. It happens to be a corridor where jet airplanes, military jet airplanes, fly over this spot where our camp is. And it was deep in the night. It was 2:30, 3 o'clock at night by the time this guy, it had been silent for a number of minutes. And this jet aircraft goes over very loud, and you can hear it, you know. And the Sasquatch, it almost laments, seemingly. He's, oh, and then he yells something. But that's one instance where I would have to say that I actually heard what I would call sadness.
The last thing, well, actually, there's two more things I wanted to mention. One was in school teaching, you hear children that develop patterns of conversation and patterns of speech where they do that repetitive, that sound that he kept repeating. And one of the common phrases is "you know," and you'll get children that are so habitual they end every even mid-sentence. You know,
yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you know, you know. And
It's a human. Yes, my daughter does that.
Kind of heard it.
It's a yes, absolutely. That's a good point, because that is one of our what we would call a terminal expression. You know.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly.
Now you got me doing it.
and then there was a Russian group of college students that were exploring a real high altitude mountain. They were all killed by something that they thought was Yeti.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
They have recordings of that. Did you ever listen to that?
No, they don't.
Oh, they don't?
No.
Okay.
No, that the massacre up in the mountains. No, they don't have. No. If they did, I would know. I'm very close friends with the top Russian guys,
Okay. There was a special on it, and I could have easily
and I think they would know.
Yeah.
Unless it's a big government conspiracy to keep it from us. There's always that.
I appreciate your.
Anyone else have a?
Yeah, appreciate it.
Any other questions? How we doing on time?
We have about till 10:15, so there might still be 25 minutes.
25 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Do you have a question, sir?
What's the paranormal thing that you didn't want
Can
to
we
get
please have all the questions asked from this spot?
Yeah. I guess we got some time. We can actually start to. He's going to ask about it, and we can.
You could even go into the things that you said we might not have enough time for.
Yeah. I'll make these pretty quick. And
I was just going to ask, what were the paranormal things you didn't want to get into? I'm just curious.
they're too.
Or the highlights, I guess.
There are too many to get into right now. And again, we'll probably be able to discuss that a little bit more in depth when we do the panel discussion. But
if there's no more questions, you could actually, because there's 20 minutes.
okay, yes. I will tell you that one of the first weird things that began happening up there that we could not ignore anymore is of course, every time me and Ron went up there, we took recording equipment. And the first few years, Ron took a video camera, okay? And I took the best little voice recorders you could buy, and we always loaded up with tons and tons of batteries, lithium, you know. And we would get up there, and whenever you could feel them, and this is something I guess I can get into. Anybody that's been around Bigfoot and been out in the woods, you can sort of tell. There's a feeling that after months and months of doing it, years of doing it, I would turn to Ron and say, Ron, they're not here. He says, yes, I know. Now, there's no scientific explanation for that. So, when we could feel them, and I know this sounds very unscientific, but at this point we don't care anymore. When we could feel them, and I would turn my recorder on and let it run, thinking that, hey, if they say something, I might catch a morpheme stream. But what we found is I would turn that recorder on, and you could actually watch the battery go, boo. Within a couple of minutes, those batteries were drained completely. And we would put more batteries in. And then there were times we'd be up there for 3 days, and there's nothing going on. And Ron and I would turn to each other and say, they're not here. They're not here, are they? My little recorder would last for days. The batteries would not move. I'd have full power for as many days as I wanted. And the same thing happened with his video camera. When we could feel him, get that camera ready. And this, of course, was only the first 5 years, because after that we decided it was no use trying to take stuff up there anymore, because it never worked. We'd start to hey, we feel him. Get that video camera ready. So all you got to do is push it on, man. We got to get these guys, right? You turn it on. Boo. This was a completely different kind of battery than I used in my little voice recorder. So that was one of the elements of strangeness that couldn't be explained by the fact that there's just a big gorilla out in the forest, right? Sir?
Yes, some questions come to mind. Back in the 70s, we don't know what kind of microphone sensitivities they had. They had to be pretty close to the creatures to catch the voice, I can imagine. Yes. And so Barry and Morehead went back to the mountains over 3 years for these recordings, once they were able to catch a picture of the creatures. They must have been very close.
Never caught a picture. Never.
Yeah, we wonder why they were not able to take a photo of these creatures. They must have been very close.
Yes, but it was always at night. It's always pitch black.
Yeah.
And now there was sightings up there, like in the morning, and even one during the middle of the day, which scared a guy. But these guys are hunters. They don't carry cameras with them wherever they go. And my feeling is that they are just very adept at avoiding that. And there's some of us that believe that you don't even see a Sasquatch unless he intends for you to see him. Of course, I can't state that definitively. But you had another part of your question?
Yeah, so since then, have they been reproduced by other expeditioners or any other area, like in Oregon or Washington, or in the other parts of the?
10 years ago, when we first began this and going out to different conferences and talking, one of our purposes was to solicit submissions from anybody. And in that effort, I published what was called the Sasquatch phonetic alphabet, which was meant for the lay person, not linguists, the lay person, to go out and to be able to write down, using my alphabet, something that they heard as a witness, right? And so right away, we began to receive submissions of different recordings, right? And they fit into a few different categories. Some of them are in fact, most of them are just birds or an elk grunting in the woods or something like this. So there's no linguistic value to them, most of them. But every single one of them, I very diligently, wrote back to them, look, I've analyzed your tape. your morpheme strain, whatever. And there's nothing of any linguistic value to this.
Yeah, one
And then
could,
I will tell you that many of them, another category, many of them are just fakes. We started receiving many tapes that I am convinced were meant to trip me up, right? Send them a fake. Oh, no. There's one prominent guy out there right now doing fakes. And he sent it to me, and I had to tell him, because he sends me a tape like, and he's all over YouTube. It's like, whoa, oh, it's a Sasquatch. He's talking to me. So this is where I got a little sarcastic. I said, sir, either you have a mentally retarded Sasquatch that is not capable of producing language, or you have a super intelligent Sasquatch pretending to be a mentally retarded Sasquatch incapable of producing language. Of course, he got mad at me and produced a big YouTube thing about how I didn't know what I was talking about. So that's the kind of stuff that we were getting for many years. And did you have something
No,
else?
thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry? I have received 3 that I would consider that share morphemes from the Barry-Morehead tapes. Very limited and very poor quality. Nothing. We've never received anything like what you've heard. This, to me, I think, was a perfect storm. I think it's a miracle that we have what we have here. And I think it pretty much amounted to the fact that these hunters had been up down that mountain for decades, had habituated, the fact that they're up there has habituated the Sasquatch to their presence. The Sasquatch know no matter how mean we sound, the hunters are not going to run off this mountain because they're big macho hunters, right? And besides the fact that the direction they would run would be off of a cliff anyway. They're not going to do it. So it's almost like a perfect storm where Sasquatches were there. They knew they weren't, and the hunters had never taken a shot at them. What they had begun to do, and any Bigfoot people out there know that Sasquatch are very partial to the innards of deer and other animals. We think it's some kind of a delicacy to them. So we do know that our hunters had begun to, when you got a deer up on the top of a mountain, you're not going to carry those guts all the way down the mountain, right? So they left them out there. And we think that maybe the Sasquatch were habituated in that way too. They knew where to go to find food. Right? So I think it all came together at a certain place in time that allowed this to happen. Well, how are we doing?
We still have about 15
Yeah.
minutes, so
Well, I can.
or finish up with whatever you want.
And another thing.
I got one question.
He's going to ask you to come to the microphone.
It's just a real,
Oh,
it's a simple one, whether or not it was omnidirectional or unidirectional mic they were using at the time. You know that?
you know what? I don't know that. I don't know. In those days, well, he was a professional, so I simply don't know that. Again, I'm not a sound specialist. I'm just the language guy, but that's probably a good question. I'm sure Ron would probably know. So, let me touch on one other thing of strangeness that goes on up there. And this was actually detailed in a movie that was just premiered. I went out to Denver just last month for the premiere of Dave Paulides' Missing 411, The Hunted. And it was just, he had me and Ron come up there just to describe some of the, and he's a good friend of mine. Dave has seen quicker than most some of the crossover between the Sasquatch and other weirdness, whatever you want to call it, UFOs, or interdimensional, whatever, right? By the way, there are very many Sasquatch researchers that do believe that the creatures are interdimensional, or that they maybe even time. But anyway, up there, there's a phenomena of lights. Weird lights doing things that lights just don't do in a place where there are no human beings. Little orbs, and we're not talking about taking a picture and you got a dust cloud, a little piece of dust in your camera. We're talking about orbs that are very bright, different sizes. One the size of a basketball, one a baseball. One time there was a rod, which is actually detailed in this movie that Ron saw, and his girlfriend at the time. A rod about this long, about that big around, and it came down and traveled through the forest, just beyond the camp, the edge of the camp, traveled through, and then just disappeared. But for the entire history up there, routinely there would be orbs that would come down. One of them in particular, they still talk about, came down, went through the forest near the camp, went down into the little glade there, and went up toward what's called Bald Peak, the mountain, what we call Bald Peak, because there's no trees on it. It's that high. And it just goes up and goes over the top of that mountain. Now that's hearsay for me because I didn't see it, but I've heard enough of the people that I love and trust that has told me that story, so I believe that. So that's just another one of the elements of weirdness up there.
I have another thought or question. I've heard the suggestion that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever, possibly had like an ESP skill, knowing that, let's say hunters are coming into an area before actually visually seeing them or anticipating where not to go or where to stay hidden low. Does that make sense?
There are dozens of reports out there from credible people. And nowadays most reports are not called reports unless they've been investigated. By the BFRO, by other people that are using good investigative skills to get the truth out. But there are dozens of reports out there that talk about mind speak, what they're calling mind speak. And a person would just be out hiking a trail or something like this, and they actually hear a human voice speak to them in their mind. So that phenomenon is out there, as witnesses claim.
Second thought question again. What areas are considered real hot spots in the United States, just staying within our own borders, as far as...
Every state in the Union.
That's what I've heard, but...
This is something a lot of people can't grasp, because, you're in Arizona. Oh, we don't have Sasquatches. Well, yeah, you do. And all you really have to do is, go to the BFRO and look up the recent. They have almost 40,000 reports, and these are not just guys calling in and writing a letter and saying, "Hey, I saw this. It was crazy." Blah blah blah. These are reports that have been investigated before they're ever posted on that site. It's impossible to dismiss 40,000 investigated reports. You know, especially when you got the same thing happen in the Everglades of Florida as you got in you know, the Yukon. It's just, you know. Did I answer your question? Oh.
I think so.
Okay.
I've heard more from the West Coast, basically.
Yeah, about being in every state. Missouri, where I live, you know, for over 100 years, we've had the reports of what they call up there. And it seems that each state or each locality has a different name for them. Right up there, we call them Momo, which stands for the Missouri Monster. And again, the reports go back over 100 years. There are, and again, I've made this point before, there are 2 places in Missouri called Monkey Mountain. In 2 very different places in the state. Now, there's a reason why that 100 years ago, some pioneer called that place Monkey Mountain, when that pioneer had probably never even seen a monkey. You know, so, but yes, every state in the union seems to have them. There is some speculation that that the ones in Florida might be a little different than the ones up in the Northwest, et cetera. You know. But the dog man in the Midwest compared to the Sasquatch up in Canada somewhere. So a lot of stuff we don't know, right? Anything else? Well, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to spending some more time talking about it this afternoon. Thank you.